Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Foss, Senior Threat Researcher and Security Strategist with VMware Carbon Black. Today, I'd like to talk with you all about the eCrime evolutions that we're seeing across the industry, and specifically focus on ransomware groups and how they're aiming to maintain and increase their profitability during these unprecedented times. So ransomware in particular is very interesting in the fact that we've seen a significant increase in these types of attacks over just the first half of 2020. This is compared to back in 2019. So, the significant uptick ever since, people have been working from home and the whole kind of landscape has shifted quite a bit at the beginning of this year. Now we're going to look at this from the standpoint of the attacker. Now, traditionally, when you think of ransomware, you think of someone opening a phishing email, that executing or downloading a document or clicking on a link, and then that executing some actions that, essentially automatically go out and encrypt the environment. Now, what we're seeing with more modern variants is much more hands-on keyboard and actual attacker involved kind of more in the process of infecting companies and unleashing their toolkits, so to speak. So we're looking at our company here, essentially a black box organization to our not so friendly little attacker here. First thing they're going to do is gather information about your organization using open source intelligence gathering. We're going to look at your social media, your web presence, your geo footprint, your geolocation, your employees, your customer base, and then any publicly exposed IP addresses and other related information that are available on Shodan, and the information behind those. And once they've done their initial open source intelligence gathering, they're going to begin the reconnaissance phase of actually scanning the organization from the internet. Now, this is going to reveal some edge devices, as you can see here, that could be potential targets for the attacker. Now, at this point, they're going to make an educated guess about probably what the rest of the environment looks like. So what they're going to do is scan and they're going to monitor this environment, often just taking note of what they've observed, what the overall exposed footprint that they might be able to go after might look like. And that's going to identify some resources they might choose to go after, such as right here. This could be a publicly exposed remote desktop server, which is kind of one of the most common ways we're seeing these ransomware groups get into companies. Another avenue could be to go after one of these home users, either through phishing or targeting their home network specifically, looking at the increases we've seen in terms of router exploits and other related attacks designated for home personal equipment. So they have a few options in terms of how they want to target this organization. So, they could decide to go after this user at their home, but more commonly than not, what we're seeing is them just going directly after these edge devices. Now, once they officially gain access to this server, they're going to drop their implant, and that's going to call back to a secondary server that they did not do their initial scanning from. So once they gain access, they're going to do some initial reconnaissance and try and understand more about the environment that they've landed in. From here, they're probably going to have to gain access to a credential so that they can elevate their privileges and begin to pivot through the environment. So once they have those creds, they can move from the demilitarized zone into the internal systems within the organization. So as you can see, they can get deeper and begin to map out more of the actual infrastructure of what this company is running. From here, they're going to pivot around and start to understand the environment. And what I've highlighted up here is going to be a backup server. Now, this is key because the majority of ransomware groups we've been following will try to backdoor the backup server and actually set up a redundant command and control access to the server. Now, this is something they probably won't use. This is going to be in case their initial entry point and their main command and control server access is cut off. They're going to have that redundant access that they're not going to touch because they don't want you to know that they have this additional access into your environment. Now from here, they're going to go try and find where your most sensitive content is. So right here, I've depicted that with a little file share. And essentially, once they've identified this data, they're going to begin to figure out, how they're going to get this out of your environment. There's a few ways to do this to avoid suspicion and especially bypass the majority of the controls that organizations have on their edge of their network, looking for large-scale data exfiltration. So the attacker is going to analyze their options and come to a couple different ways they might be able to get this out of the environment. Now, one is going to be go through a user and move these files maybe slowly or overtly, depending on what monitoring is in place, through another compromised user within that environment, and then essentially offload those to another server that's going to be their collection point. And usually these are going to be compromised web servers or things of that nature. And then they're going to be able to move it from that server to whatever their end goal is, usually a marketplace or another kind of database where they're storing all of this information, and they can look at profitability from the stolen data. Another common way we're seeing is them leveraging the infrastructure and moving these files out slowly over protocols such as DNS. Because once they've exfiltrated this data, the attacker is going to profit from this, regardless of whether you pay the ransom or however you just choose to handle this incident. So they're often going to move this to their websites, their marketplaces, really looking at how they can get the most bang for the buck. Now, prominently, what we're seeing now is this extortion angle, where they're going to leverage this in order to get you to pay the ransom. Regardless of whether you pay the ransom to decrypt your environment, you may want to pay the ransom to avoid having your company's secrets exposed to the world. So they're looking to profit from this no matter what you choose to do at this point. So at this point, the customer is aware of this, their environment is encrypted, and they're going to begin these discussions with the adversary to understand, all right, let me pay you to get the keys and decrypt this content. Now, sometimes this doesn't even work. You could pay and get the keys, and they might not even decrypt the content in this environment. So for this scenario, we'll pretend that this is a legit ransomware actor. They aren't using a ransomware as a service and don't know what they're doing. So we'll pretend that this works and they decrypt their environment, and the customer thinks they've kind of dodged a bullet at this point, right? They're not happy, but they're glad to have their data back. The key thing here, and the reason I bring this up, is we still have that redundant command and control access that was probably not discovered when you're going through the incident response process initially. May even have additional compromised users that are calling back to the original command and control server if this wasn't properly investigated and followed through. In fact, more commonly than not, you're going to have multiple servers within the environment calling back. So even though you've got your files back and everything, the attacker could still have access to your environment, and they can still profit from this in many ways. So you really want to make sure you're doing full incident response investigation when you're hit with ransomware, because it's not always as simple as just the contents of your files are encrypted. Now, to dig into this in some more detail, we actually tracked a significant number of ransomware groups over to all of 2019 and mapped them back to MITRE in terms of the techniques that were leveraged in their automated ransomware payloads. So as you can see, a majority of these, so these are all the TIDs, the red dots, and the blue dots are different ransomware groups. And you can see the relationships between these and the mappings to persistence mechanisms that are baked into these payloads for these ransomware binaries. Oftentimes modifying the master boot record to maintain that persistence. They will create scheduled tasks. They'll set up registry run keys. They'll leverage the startup folder options, and they will almost always use hidden files and directories. So these are things you definitely need to be aware of, because ransomware is doing a lot more than simply encrypting content. They're also gathering credentials, scraping files from browsers most commonly, any open text files that are on users' desktops, any passwords. Cryptocurrency wallets as well are a significant target for these groups. And they will often also employ keystroke logging. As you can see here, a majority of all of these groups are definitely implementing all of these techniques that are covered on this slide here. Now, additionally, a lot of this includes automated collection, going through gathering data from these systems and figuring out, how they're going to exfiltrate this. And some of it is automatically going to be exfiltrated. Though the real interesting stuff we're seeing now is definitely the hands-on keyboard attackers that are running through and doing this manually for months at a time before actually hitting the go button and encrypting the environment. It's just something where, you need to treat ransomware as any other breach. This is someone in your environment, and they do have access to a lot of sensitive data. And, you need to do full incident response recovery following these attacks. Now, looking into some of the groups themselves, we're just going to quickly run through some of the extortion sites and what they actually do with this data once it's been stolen. So as you can see here, the Maze Cartel, probably one of the most prominent ransomware groups that's known for extortion. They post all of their stolen data on a public website that's just on the ClearNet, mazenews.top. So they're one of the ones that, they're pretty brazen with what they're doing with this data. And it's constantly updated. They're constantly leaking data from their victims who've chosen not to pay them to get their data back. So you can access all of this through their site, and it's pretty prominent. They try and give people the opportunity to respond before it gets to this point, but if they don't, they're going to publicly embarrass their victims. Nephilim is another similar one. They run a website called Corporate Leaks. Ragnar Locker is a real interesting one. Same sort of thing. They run the Ragnar Locker Leaks website. And recently it's been announced that they have teamed up with the Maze Cartel. So now they are working together, sharing techniques, sharing infrastructure, and they're just that much more powerful. Our Evil, or Soda no Kibi, is another real interesting group. They run a website called the Happy Blog, which is where they post a lot of their stolen data and extortion kind of content. One thing I want to bring your attention to with this group, right here, what we're looking at is just some details about how long they had been in this environment before they actually exfiltrated data and ransomwared them. So up here you can see for over a month, the structure of the corporation's work, user services, and cloud data storage were examined. And then they give details about what was stolen down here. But you can see this isn't just automated malware. This is someone hands on keyboard, spending time and doing due diligence to map this out effectively and understanding what's going to be most detrimental to this corporation. Now, some of them aren't all that serious. PISA, or short for Protect Your System, Amigo, is an interesting group, and they have a pretty good sense of humor, honestly. They refer to their victims as partners, and they give you nice little rundowns about their business and what they do, and the information that was stolen from them, they phrase it as the partner helping you understand more about their company. Clop, another ransomware group, same sort of thing, leaking the data and publicly embarrassing companies. One thing that is nice about this group is they actually mentioned down here, we've never attacked hospitals, orphanages, nursing homes, charitable foundations, and we will not. So, that's good. At least some of these groups have some kind of morals, but still, they're definitely still not the good guys. Doppelpaymer, another one. They are definitely one of the more prominent groups and more well-known groups. Same sort of thing. They post proofs of the data that is stolen and leak this data openly online. Secumit, I believe I'm saying that right. Very public group. They actually run their website on the ClearNet as well, so you can access this without going through Tor. One thing I do want to point out in their group, since they track their views, there's quite a few people viewing these leaked documents and leaked sensitive data from these companies. So you can see this has wide-reaching impact once this data is stolen and posted on these websites for extortion. AKO, they ran a website called Data Leak Blog that's actively being rebuilt right now. Now, some of these other groups, such as Krylock and Prolock and Snake and various other ransomware groups, actually just leverage these open hacking forums, such as XSS and exploit.in or the RAID forums. And basically, they'll just post some of the stolen data. They'll offer it for sale. They'll use it in credential stuffing and things of that nature. So it kind of ends up in the more general eCrime infrastructure at that point. So these folks aren't running their own infrastructure. They're just hosting on existing marketplaces and forums. Now, some key takeaways from what we've covered here. eCrime groups are going to leverage any and all means at their disposal to profit from a breach of every organization that they get into. So ransomware as a service, and what we've dubbed as access mining, which is a reselling of access to these systems, is something we're seeing significantly pick up in prominence. And what's concerning about this is, especially ransomware as a service, it really lowers the bar to entry for allowing someone to take advantage of situations and executing attacks, very sophisticated attacks, without really having any understanding of what's going on under the hood. They can buy existing access that has already been sold, to a company, and then they can buy access to a ransomware as a service product. And using both of those things, they can go encrypt companies, and they actually don't have to know really much at all about what they're doing in order to be cause significant damage. So it's lowering that bar and allowing just anyone who has enough money to get in, compromise companies, and begin getting into this cycle of, the whole eCrime sort of ecosystem. This also significantly complicates attribution. Various ransomware groups are sharing code along with shared infrastructure, especially as we see people just renting these services and leveraging them for one-off attacks. It's hard to differentiate from the people writing the software versus someone's executing it. Really just muddies the water in general and makes this attribution difficult, which is great for these attackers because it allows them to continue doing these things for much longer before they're able to be uncovered and found out. So really at the end of the day, you need to look at deploying endpoint protection of some kind, really just making sure that you are blocking the execution of ransomware. You're able to understand and see the whole picture of what's happening within your network, put those pieces back together, understand the details of what your processes are doing, and how you can actually segment your networks effectively so that the scenario we covered in the first part of this presentation is not something that is easy for an attacker to do. So a bunch of different things we could dig into here, but I want to keep it high level and just endpoint protection, network segmentation, layered visibility is going to be key when it comes to preventing and understanding these attacks. One of the trends we're seeing now, compromising third-party and adjacent targets to achieve a primary objective, is becoming very commonplace. One of the groups, which we didn't talk about earlier, Emotet, or at least groups leveraging Emotet, I should say, have actually been leveraging compromising email at the companies that they've victimized and leveraging old conversations to further spread to other organizations that have trust relationships built between them. So rekindling these old conversations, maybe sending along a file that has a macro in it, it's from someone you trust. So more than likely the victim is going to open that file and run that content. Now, these ransomware groups, they can be negotiated with, but you really should never trust them. At the end of the day, they're always going to angle to make as much money as possible. And even if you are paying them, they do make a pretty good bang for their buck here. You should still take the standpoint that they have residual access to your environment and that you need to take full responsibility to investigate this thoroughly and make sure that they're completely closed out and cannot gain access again back into the environment. So really, if possible, you want to avoid paying that ransom altogether, which means keeping them out of your network to begin with. So really, evaluate your environment, watch the data exfiltration and recon activity, look for redundant command and control access. And some of these aren't going to be standard beacons that go out like every 5 seconds or something like that. You might need to be looking for something that maybe calls out once a day, once a week, once a month, because this is going to be a tertiary access for them. It's not their main point that they're getting back in and executing these actions from, but they want to maintain that foothold into your environment for as long as possible. So definitely look for secondary C2. And we always recommend hiring an incident response firm to ensure that this redundant access is taken care of, because they're going to do as thorough as possible a review of the attack, and hopefully that will catch some of these kinds of items. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining me today, and feel free to reach out either on Twitter or my email, which are both down below. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your conference. And thanks so much for joining me today.